Hello again, it's your internet dad, sharing life lessons I offered my own sons in the hope that they'll help you. The subject of today's talk is entitled War Movies, Hollywood or History. We're going to discuss the historical accuracy of movies. Now, many years ago I was a movie distributor, but you don't have to have been in the business to know that the real purpose of a movie is to make money, and they do that by manipulating our emotions. But you can imagine that historical accuracy is pretty far down that list. But do remember that if you see a good war movie or one that's flawed, that you can always check up on the real story yourself afterwards, and I heartily recommend it. Now, the original war movies were allegedly real ones. They were the documentaries on the First World War that we still see on television today. They were all fake. They were shot in a safe training area many miles behind the front line and is now passed on as the real thing. The reason why this was done was, of course, the equipment was so bulky and the enemy snipers were so good, it just wasn't safe to do it. In the Second World War, much the same thing happened. A lot of the newsreels from the Second World War are very much fake, and actually some of them are made by Hollywood, with Hollywood assistance. Only towards the end of the war, when the equipment became a lot smaller and the enemy was in full retreat, did you see the real thing. Following the Second World War, when millions upon millions of men had been in service, a whole genre of war movies was produced by Hollywood and elsewhere. And those war movies then created subgenres, which would be subjects like Revolutionary and Napoleonic War movies, aerial dogfights, submarines. But many of them would end up being relatively modern infantry stories, and the most common of which involved just 30 men of a platoon. And that became known as a platoon movie and became a staple of Hollywood. Now, to be fair to movie makers in terms of historical accuracy, in the days before computer special effects, they could only film what they saw. And a good example of that is black powder era battlefields like War and Peace, Waterloo, Charge of the Light Brigade, Revolutionary War. What really happened in those battles was that it frequently started with an artillery barrage, both gun lines firing towards each other, hoping to disable guns and then maybe take on the infantry who were massed and ready to attack. What that artillery barrage produced was a lot of smoke, and that smoke, depending on the wind, would drift down the valley and towards the troops assembled for action. Now, when the infantry of both sides finally engaged, they would be firing maybe 300 rounds per battalion every 20 seconds. There were thousands of men on the battlefield. You can imagine what happens with the smoke there. And that explains why you hear these stories of infantrymen in those days standing, firing at the enemy 50 yards away. And it seems a little insane, but the weapons weren't that accurate. But more importantly, nobody could see anything. Now, if you were a movie producer, trying to film grey smoke will not give you a successful or exciting movie. Now, many people have strong opinions as to which is the best and most historical movie of all time. But I'm going to suggest to you that the best is not a movie at all. It's a miniseries called Band of Brothers. If you haven't seen it, please do so. It is really first rate. Most war movies will concentrate on the officers or the NCOs, or much more commonly on the enlisted men. This series addresses all three groups, explains their challenges, their fears, and their hopes. And that's what makes it a masterpiece. There are other war movies that have segments which are absolutely brilliant, even though the majority of the film is historically inaccurate. And to give you one example, it's the movie Saving Private Ryan. First 20 minutes of that movie is possibly the best illustration of the violence of an opposed landing in any movie ever made. Positively brilliant, breathtaking, 20 minutes of almost intolerable tension until they cross the beach and climb the cliffs, defeat the enemy. But thereafter it descends into just another silly platoon movie with implausible plot lines and silly sequences. But that shouldn't stop you going to see the movie. Another example of inaccuracy is the more recent movie, The Hurt Locker, which discusses bomb disposal in the Middle East. It's horrendously inaccurate in terms of what the team is and the equipment they use, but is breathtakingly insightful on one issue, which is the addiction that some soldiers have to danger. So do watch the movie. It's astonishing. If you want to know more about adrenaline, check my video entitled Adrenaline, the Unknown Addiction. Now, there are some movies that we might call category killers. In other words, those subgenres that we talked about, that it's so good that it makes other ones look ridiculous. And my suggestion on that would be the 1981 German submarine movie Das Boot, where submarine genres are concerned. It was the gold standard. And yet 20 years later, we get an incredibly inaccurate submarine movie that's U-571, including a sequence where two submarines submerged are firing torpedoes at each other blindly. Well, I can wish him luck on that. But I also want to wish luck to you in your search for good war movies. There are hundreds and hundreds of them on YouTube, and most of them will have an internet connection to check on the accuracies or not. But I hope all of these movies will provoke you to do a lot more research and read the history books of the campaign or the battle. It's a fun thing. And I wish you luck in your search. Till next time.